"Rancher, do you just want my body like everyone else's?" The widowed Apache woman whispered in fury. The sun had barely risen over the wide plains, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and distant wood smoke. In this quiet, remote corner of the land, life moved slowly, dictated by seasons, the cattle, and the occasional visitor who braved the long roads. Here, a widowed Apache woman named Ayana lived, her small home built with care near the edge of the forest. She had known loss in ways that left deep marks in her heart, yet she carried herself with a strength few could match. Life had demanded resilience from her, and she had learned to answer those demands without complaint. That morning, as she worked on the small garden behind her home, her hands moved swiftly through the soil, planting seeds that promised life months from now. Her eyes, dark and steady, kept watch on the horizon. She had learned to trust nothing but her own senses. There had been travelers and strangers in the area before, some kind and some cruel, and each encounter had left a mark on her careful trust. Yet today, there was a feeling that something was different. A distant sound reached her ears, the faint clip-clop of hooves on hard ground. She paused, letting her hands rest in the dirt. The sound grew closer, measured and deliberate. From the tree line, a man emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather boots and a faded hat that shaded his eyes. His horse moved with the quiet confidence of one used to long journeys. Ayana's instincts told her to be cautious. She had lived in this land long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. The man dismounted near the edge of her property, giving a respectful nod before speaking. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Ayana studied him silently. His movements were deliberate, careful, and yet there was something about him that seemed different. She had seen many men come through the plains, most with their own selfish interests, and her heart had grown wary, but there was no immediate threat in his posture or expression. Her voice, steady and controlled, finally broke the silence. "Who are you, and why are you here?" she asked, planting her feet firmly on the ground. "I'm a rancher," he replied. "I work nearby and travel often. I wanted to speak with you. I've heard about you, about the way you manage your land. It's impressive." His words were polite, careful, as if testing the waters. Ayana's lips pressed into a thin line. Flattery was a tool often used to hide selfish intentions, and she had been flattered before, only to regret it later. "I live my life in peace," she said, her tone sharp but calm. "I have no interest in visitors unless they bring honesty with them. Speak clearly if you mean to be here." Her eyes held his steadily, a quiet challenge. There was a fire in her gaze, a determination that refused to be ignored. The man gave a small, respectful nod. "I mean no harm. I've seen the way you care for this land, how you've built your home here after everything you've been through. I wanted to offer help, if you'll allow it." There was sincerity in his voice, though Ayana's instincts refused to fully accept it. She had learned the hard way that words alone could not be trusted. Actions revealed truth, not speeches. Ayana turned back to her garden, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Help?" she asked, voice low but edged with curiosity. What could a rancher like you offer to someone who has managed for years on their own? Her question hung in the morning air. She did not look at him, instead focusing on the small sprouts beginning to emerge from the soil. He stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, his presence calm but noticeable. "I can offer assistance with the land, with the animals. even with repairs. And sometimes it helps to have someone to talk to. Life can be heavy, especially when you face it alone. His words were simple, but there was a depth to them, as if he had experienced loss and loneliness himself. Ayanna felt a twinge of something she hadn't expected, a flicker of recognition that someone else might understand solitude. But she quickly pushed it aside. Her life had been shaped by loss, and trust was earned, not given. "I survive," she said, her tone firm. "I have survived without anyone's help. I can do so still." The man did not argue. Instead, he simply nodded, understanding that his presence alone could not force entry into her life. For a few moments, silence stretched between them, the wind rustling the grass, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Then, softly, he spoke again. "I don't want anything from you except the chance to be of use. If you decide you don't need me, I'll leave." But I thought it worth the effort to ask. There was honesty in his words that Ayanna could not deny. And yet, she was wary. The world had not been kind to widows, especially those who lived alone and managed their land with care. Men often came with intentions that went beyond simple assistance, and she had learned to recognize the subtle shifts in tone, in body language, in the words chosen. She narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. "I've seen men like you before," she said slowly, her voice steady. "They come with promises, claiming to care only to expect something in return. I've lived too long and seen too much to be fooled again." Her hands rested on her hips as she confronted him fully. "Do you think your words can change that?" He smiled faintly, not in arrogance, but in understanding. "No," he admitted. "Words are not enough. Only actions can speak louder. I cannot expect you to believe me yet. All I can do is show you through what I do, not what I say." For a moment, the wind seemed to still, as if even nature paused to listen. Ayanna felt the tension within her ease slightly. Though caution remained, she could not allow herself to be swept away by polite words. She had to see, to observe, to ensure that this man's presence did not bring harm. "You may stay here for a time," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "But know this, I do not tolerate deceit or laziness. You will be judged by your deeds, not by your speech. Fail in that, and I will ask you to leave immediately." He inclined his head, accepting her terms without hesitation. "I understand, and I will respect your boundaries," he said. There was a quiet humility in him, a willingness to meet her on her terms. Ayanna returned to her work in the garden, but her mind could not entirely focus. There was something unusual about this man, something that made her heart uneasy yet curious. She had been alone for so long, surviving without anyone, and yet the presence of another human being, someone who seemed willing to respect her strength, was unsettling in a way she could not fully name. As the sun climbed higher, he quietly moved to assist, not imposing, simply carrying water and tools without speaking unless spoken to. His presence was steady, calm, and patient. Ayanna found herself observing him, noticing how he respected her space, how he worked diligently without complaint. Slowly, a small part of her began to wonder if perhaps she had misjudged him. But even as that thought flickered, she reminded herself of the past, the betrayals, the men who had come with false intentions, the promises broken. She would not allow herself to forget. She would watch, she would observe, and she would let actions, not words, determine the course of their relationship. The morning passed in quiet labor, the wind carrying whispers through the grass, the sun warming the soil, and the man working faithfully by her side. And though Ayana's heart remained guarded, she felt a faint thread of something new, a possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, not all strangers brought harm. Yet she would not allow herself to be swept away by hope. She had survived alone, and she would continue to do so, no matter what came. The morning passed, and the sun rose higher into the clear blue sky, casting long shadows across the small homestead. Ayana moved between her garden and the modest wooden house she had built with her own hands. Each step she took, each task she completed, was a reminder of the life she had fought to hold together. Her hands were strong from years of work, and her mind had grown sharper from surviving alone in the wilderness. She was proud of her independence, yet a small, quiet part of her could not ignore the presence of the rancher who had stayed by her side. He worked without complaint, carrying water to the garden, repairing a broken fence post, and even helping with the small chores around the house. His movements were steady, patient, and deliberate. Ayana watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the care with which he handled her things. It was rare for someone to show respect without expecting immediate reward, and she was wary of trusting so easily. Yet she could not deny that the work lightened her load. When she approached the well to draw water, he was already there, lowering the bucket gently and pulling it up with a steady rhythm. "I thought it might be easier if I helped," he said simply. Ayana nodded, saying nothing. Words were not necessary. His actions spoke louder than anything he could say. After filling her watering can, she began tending to the vegetables, her hands moving through the soil with practiced ease. The sun was warm and the breeze carried the scent of the forest, mixed with the earthiness of the garden. She felt the rhythm of the day, the steady pace that had always grounded her. But today, it was different. The quiet presence of another human being, someone who moved through her space without disturbing it, was unfamiliar. "You have a good sense for this land," he said softly, leaning against a fence post and watching her work. "It is well kept and strong. It shows care, patience, and respect." Ayana did not look at him, but she felt the weight of his words. They were honest, she could tell, because he had not added flattery or exaggeration. "The land gives what it wants to," she said finally. "I can guide it, but it is never truly under control." Her hands paused for a moment as she examined the sprouts growing strong from the soil. "I have learned to respect that. Any who try to force it only end in failure." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. "I think that is wise," he said. "Many try to fight nature, or people, or even themselves. They forget that patience often brings the strongest results." For a moment, silence fell between them, filled only by the wind rustling through the grass and the soft sound of water trickling in the well. Ayana worked quietly, though her mind wandered. She found herself thinking about the past, about the days when her husband had been alive, the small joys they had shared, and the pain that had followed his death. The world had been harsh, and yet it had also taught her endurance, patience, and the quiet strength of self-reliance. The rancher spoke again, gently breaking her thoughts. "If you don't mind, I can also help with the animals today," he said. "It may take some time, but together it will go faster, and you can rest a little." Ayana hesitated. She had always done the work herself, handling the animals, mending fences, and caring for the land without outside help. Trusting someone else was difficult, but the way he had worked so far, without complaint and without trying to control her life, made her pause. She nodded slowly.
"All right," she said. "But remember, you work as I guide."
"The land and the animals answered to me. If you do not follow, you will have to leave."
He accepted her terms without hesitation. "I understand," he said simply.
I will follow your lead." Together they walked to the small pen where a few goats and chickens wandered. The animals looked up, curious, but did not seem frightened by the man's presence. Ayana explained her routine, how she fed them, checked for health, and made sure they were safe from predators. He listened carefully, asking only necessary questions, never overstepping. As they worked side by side, she felt a strange sense of companionship. Not friendship yet, not trust, but a recognition that this person was not an intruder. The day wore on, the sun moving higher and then dipping toward the horizon. Sweat covered their faces, dust clung to their clothes, but neither complained. The physical labor brought a rhythm to their time together, a way for Ayana to observe him closely. He was strong, careful, and patient, not only in his work, but in how he interacted with her. He did not speak unless necessary, did not make demands, and allowed her space to manage her home as she always had. As the afternoon light softened, a small moment of tension broke through. One of the goats wandered too close to the fence, its horn catching on a loose wire. The goat panicked, pulling at the fence, and Ayana moved quickly to stop it. The man stepped forward instantly, helping her hold the animal steady without forcing it. Their hands brushed briefly as they worked together, and for the first time Ayana felt a flicker of warmth. Not in a romantic sense, but in recognition of human connection. She pulled back, reminding herself of the walls she had built around her heart. "It is done," she said firmly, stepping back to catch her breath. "Do not assume familiarity. I manage my home, and I manage myself. You are here as a helper, nothing more." He nodded, respectful, and did not push. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I will not presume anything." Evening came, painting the sky in shades of pink and violet. The rancher helped Ayana secure the animals for the night, ensuring that all were safe and comfortable. The quiet of the land settled over them, a calm that came from shared labor and mutual respect. Ayana felt a small relief, a sense that the day had passed without incident, without conflict, and with work that was done. Afterward, they returned to the small house. Ayana began preparing a simple meal, using the vegetables she had tended in the garden, while he set the table and cleaned the dishes. It was a silent cooperation, a rhythm of two people who were not yet friends, but who respected one another's space. She observed him quietly, noting how he carried himself, how his eyes moved with care and attention, and how he did not attempt to take control of anything in her home. For a woman who had learned to survive on her own, this was unusual. It was rare to find someone who could offer help without expectation or imposition. And yet she remained cautious, reminding herself that trust must be earned, step by step. After dinner, they sat near the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting warm light across the room. Ayana allowed herself a moment to watch him in the soft glow. He had cleaned the dishes, repaired the fence, and worked alongside her without complaint or hesitation. That alone was a mark of character she could respect. He spoke then, quietly, without looking to press for connection. "You have lived through much," he said, "and yet you continue to care for this land, these animals, and yourself. That is strength many would not understand." Ayana's hands rested on her lap. She did not reply immediately, letting the words settle. There was truth in them, though not flattery. She had endured loss, loneliness, and hardship, yet she had risen above it. "Strength is not enough," she said finally. "It takes patience, it takes care. It takes knowing the land, the animals, and yourself. Without understanding, strength can be wasted." He nodded, listening, taking her words to heart. There was no argument, no interruption, only attention and respect. And in that simple act, Ayana felt something she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time: acknowledgement. Night fell fully, the stars appearing, one by one, in the vast sky. The wind whispered softly through the grass, carrying a coolness that touched their faces. Ayana prepared for bed, her mind still alert, her body weary from the day's work. The rancher settled nearby, not intruding, merely present as a companion in silence. As she lay down, Ayana reflected on the day. She had watched him, tested him in small ways, and observed his actions. So far, he had met her standards. He had shown patience, care, and respect, yet she knew that this was only the beginning. Trust was fragile, earned through continued deeds over time. She would continue to observe, continue to measure his intentions, and continue to protect her independence. And yet, as her eyes closed and the night wrapped around the small home, she could not deny a quiet hope. Perhaps, for the first time in a long while, there was someone who could walk alongside her without threatening the life she had built. Someone who might prove that not all strangers brought harm. The next morning, the sky was a pale blue, and the first rays of sunlight lit up the plains with a soft glow. Ayana woke early, as she always did, and moved quietly through her small home. The air smelled of dew and earth, fresh and clean. She had learned to cherish these early hours, when the world was still and life had not yet demanded her attention. The rancher was already awake, tending to the animals with careful, deliberate movements. He had begun the day before her, and she noticed that he did not rush or complain, only moved steadily with the quiet confidence of someone who understood responsibility. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, letting the sun warm her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Good morning," he replied, giving her a small, respectful nod. There was no expectation in his tone, no demand for attention, only acknowledgement. Ayana found herself noticing the ease with which he moved among the animals. He adjusted the feed, checked the fences, and even spoke quietly to the goats, as if to reassure them that all was well. Ayana felt a quiet admiration. It was rare to find someone who treated her world with such care. She had been wary of men before, of strangers who brought promises and demands, who believed themselves entitled to her life. Yet this man, through actions rather than words, was proving that he could be trusted, or at least that he could be observed and measured without fear. She went to the garden, checking the progress of the vegetables. The sprouts had grown taller overnight, reaching toward the sun with strength. She smiled faintly at the sight, remembering how she had planted them with careful hands. She had cultivated life in this soil for years, knowing each patch, each plant, and each subtle change in the wind or rain. The rancher followed quietly, bringing a small watering can. "Ah, I can help with these," he said gently, holding it out to her. "I can manage," Ayana said, though there was no sharpness in her voice. She was testing him again, seeing if he would insist or overstep. He simply nodded, setting the can down and stepping back. His respect was clear, and it eased her caution slightly. They worked side by side, the morning passing with a rhythm that was both familiar and unusual. Ayana's mind wandered to the days before her husband had died, the moments of quiet joy, and the sudden harsh losses that had followed. She had built her life carefully after that, learning to rely only on herself, yet she could not ignore the sense that having someone help, even quietly, brought a small lightness she had not expected. As they finished tending the garden, a sudden sound came from the forest edge. The rustle of branches, the snap of a twig, made her tense. Her hand went instinctively to the small knife she carried at her side, though it was more for reassurance than actual need. The rancher noticed immediately, his own body tensing as he scanned the trees. "It's probably just an animal," he said softly, his voice calm but alert. Ayana nodded but did not lower her guard entirely. "This land has many dangers," she said, her eyes fixed on the edge of the forest. "Not all that moves is harmless." He stepped closer to her, careful to maintain respect for her space, yet offering a presence she could rely on if needed. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll follow your lead. You know this land better than I ever could." The rustling stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and silence returned to the morning. Ayana exhaled slowly, realizing that she had been holding her breath. She turned back to the garden, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the awareness of how fragile safety could be in this place. They spent the rest of the morning checking fences and repairing a small section that had been weakened by wind and rain. The rancher worked steadily, fetching materials, hammering posts, and securing wires. His focus was absolute, his respect for her instructions evident. She watched him, noting his patience and the care with which he handled each task. Around midday, Ayana prepared a simple lunch, using bread, vegetables, and a small portion of dried meat she had preserved. She set the table outside, under the shade of a tree. The rancher helped carry dishes and utensils, careful not to disturb her arrangements. They ate in silence, the only sounds the soft wind through the grass and the distant call of a bird. After lunch, Ayana suggested they take a short break. She sat on a flat rock near the garden, her hands folded in her lap. The rancher sat a few feet away, giving her space, yet his presence was steady and comforting. She allowed herself a moment to observe him without judgment, seeing how he interacted with the world around him. There was no rush, no expectation, only steady care. "You have a remarkable sense for this land," he said softly, breaking the quiet. "I've seen many people work, but few with such understanding. You listen to the soil, the animals, and the weather. It is rare to see such patience." Ayana looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his. There was truth in his words, and she could not deny it. "I have had to learn," she said simply. "Loss teaches understanding. Loneliness teaches patience. The land, it teaches everything if you listen carefully." He nodded, as if absorbing her words. "I can see that," he said quietly, "and I will follow your guidance if you allow it. I wish only to help, nothing more." She studied him for a long moment. There was no push, no expectation, no arrogance. He simply spoke with honesty. That honesty was rare, and she recognized it. Yet she reminded herself that trust had to be earned over time. Words could be true, but actions revealed the deeper character of a person. The afternoon brought more work. They repaired the chicken coop, mended fences, and even cleared a small patch of weeds near the garden. Ayana gave instructions, and the rancher followed them precisely, offering help only when asked and never overstepping. With each task, she observed his diligence, his respect, and his quiet patience. By evening, the work was done, and the homestead looked well-tended and secure. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ayana felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. She had managed her home for years alone, yet the presence of someone who respected her space and followed her guidance made the work feel lighter. Not easier, she had never needed it to be easier, but lighter in the sense of shared effort, quiet companionship, and mutual respect. Dinner was simple, a mix of vegetables, bread, and a small portion of meat. They ate quietly, yet there was a rhythm to their actions, an unspoken understanding of cooperation. Afterward, they sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. Ayana reflected on the day, on the rancher's patience, and on the unusual ease that had settled over their work together. "You have endured much," he said softly. And yet, you continue to care for everything around you. That is a strength many would not understand. Ayana looked into the fire, her thoughts drifting to the past. She had endured loss, loneliness, and hardship, yet she had survived, and she had built a life that she could be proud of. Strength alone is not enough, she said quietly. It is care, patience, and understanding that truly matters. Without those, strength can destroy rather than build. He listened, attentive, not interrupting, not arguing. His quiet presence and careful listening spoke volumes. For the first time in many years, Ayana felt a sense of calm and trust. Not full trust, not yet, but the first stirrings of it. She realized that the rancher's presence was not intrusive. It was steady, patient, and respectful. Qualities she valued more than words could express. As night fell and the stars began to appear, Ayana prepared for bed, her mind still alert, her body tired from the day's labor. The rancher settled nearby, not close, not imposing, merely present as a companion in the silence of the evening. She allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement of his presence, knowing that this day had been different. It had been marked by cooperation, patience, and careful observation, and she felt a subtle hope that perhaps not all strangers brought harm. Yet she reminded herself, as always, that trust must be earned through continued action. The days ahead would test him further, and she would continue to measure his intentions. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, Ayana felt a small, quiet relief. Perhaps, she thought, there was someone who could walk alongside her without threatening the life she had built. The following morning arrived with a soft mist that lingered over the plains. The dew on the grass sparkled as the sun rose slowly, painting everything in a gentle golden light. Ayana stepped outside of her small home, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could feel the quiet hum of life all around her, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, the soft murmur of the river a few miles away. There was a calm in the air that made her chest feel lighter, though she remained watchful, as always. Life had taught her that peace was often temporary and vigilance was constant. The rancher was already at work, mending a section of the fence near the edge of her property. His movements were steady and confident, but careful, never rushing, never careless. Ayana watched him from a distance as she moved toward the garden. She carried a small basket of vegetables to harvest for the day, her hands moving with the practiced ease of years of labor. Though the rancher had been with her for several days now, her caution had not faded. She still observed him closely, silently measuring his actions, noting every movement and gesture. "Good morning," he said softly, without looking up, as if aware that words were not always necessary. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm, carrying a firmness that reminded him of the boundaries he must respect. She began her work in the garden, carefully selecting the ripest vegetables and trimming the leaves. The rancher came closer, carrying a small watering can, but he did not intrude, simply setting it down near her. "I can help with that," he offered gently. "I can manage," she said, without harshness, simply testing his patience and respect. He nodded without argument and stepped back, allowing her to continue her work at her own pace. His respect for her autonomy was something she noticed daily, and though she did not yet trust him fully, it planted a seed of curiosity about the man's character. As they worked, a sudden sound came from the tree line, a snapping of a branch, quick and sharp. Ayana froze, her body tensing instinctively. The rancher, noticing immediately, straightened and scanned the forest edge, his eyes sharp. "Probably just an animal," he said quietly, but his calm voice carried reassurance. Ayana's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, but we cannot assume that everything moving is harmless," she said firmly. She had lived through too many encounters with strangers and dangers alike to ignore her instincts. The rancher stepped closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I'll follow your lead," he said. "You know this land better than I ever could." The tension lingered for a moment until the rustling stopped. Ayana exhaled slowly, allowing herself to relax slightly. Even though she remained cautious, she realized that having someone by her side, alert and careful, brought a small comfort she had not expected. Later in the morning, she suggested they check the nearby creek that supplied water to her homestead. Together, they walked along the narrow path, the rancher matching her pace without complaint or hurry. The creek ran clear and cold, and Ayana paused to scoop water in her hands and splash her face, feeling refreshed by the coolness. He did the same quietly, respecting her space, and they continued along the bank, checking the flow and ensuring that no animals or debris threatened the water supply. As they worked, she noticed how he observed the land with care. He did not rush or make assumptions. Every step was deliberate, every action measured. Even the way he adjusted stones to prevent erosion was thoughtful. It was clear he had experience with the land, but he was willing to listen and learn rather than impose his knowledge. Ayana found herself studying him closely, curious about the man who had managed to enter her space without overstepping. By midday, they returned to the homestead. Ayana prepared a simple lunch of bread, vegetables, and a small portion of preserved meat. They ate quietly under the shade of a tree, the warm sunlight filtering through the leaves. There was a rhythm to their actions, an unspoken understanding of shared space and cooperation. Though neither spoke much, the silence felt comfortable rather than forced. After lunch, Ayana suggested they focus on the barn, where a few repairs were needed. A rancher followed her lead, gathering materials and tools without hesitation. She instructed him step by step, explaining the tasks and their importance. He listened carefully, offering assistance only when needed, never overstepping or attempting to take control. As they worked, a moment arose that tested both patience and trust. A portion of the old roof had weakened, and while she tried to secure it, the wood shifted under her weight. The rancher moved instantly, steadying the beam without startling her. Their hands touched briefly as they worked together, and Ayana felt a flicker of surprise, a warmth she quickly suppressed. She reminded herself that trust and caution must remain, that her independence could never be compromised. "It is done," she said firmly after the beam was secured. "Remember, I set the rules here. I manage this land. You assist, nothing more." He nodded, his expression calm. "I understand," he said quietly, his tone carrying no argument or resentment. Evening came with a soft glow that painted the homestead in warm tones. The rancher helped feed the animals and secure the fences. They moved efficiently, almost silently, the work flowing naturally between them. Ayana noticed that his respect and patience had not waned over the day. If anything, his actions had grown more confident but never forceful. Dinner was simple, a quiet meal shared in the soft light of the evening. Afterward, they sat near the fire watching the flames flicker. Ayana allowed herself a moment to observe the rancher without judgment. He had proven patience, diligence, and respect over several days. She still did not fully trust him, but she could acknowledge the effort and consistency he showed. "You have endured much," he said softly, breaking the silence, "and yet you continue to care for everything around you. That is remarkable." Ayana looked into the fire, her thoughts drifting. She had survived loss, loneliness, and hardship, yet she had built a life full of strength and care. "Strength alone is not enough," she said quietly. It is patience, care, and understanding that sustain life. Without them, strength can be destructive. He listened without interruption, his calm presence offering a quiet support she had not allowed herself to experience in years. She realized that he did not demand trust or affection, that he simply existed beside her with patience and care. For the first time in a long while, she felt the beginnings of cautious hope. Perhaps not all strangers sought harm. Perhaps some could walk alongside her without threatening her independence. Night fell and the stars appeared in the vast sky. Ayanna prepared for bed, her mind alert, reflecting on the day's events. The rancher settled nearby, silently present, offering companionship without intrusion. She allowed herself to appreciate this quiet connection, understanding that trust was still a delicate seed, needing time and continued demonstration to grow fully. As she drifted to sleep, she thought about the moments of the day, the shared work, the silent respect, the subtle understanding between them. It was different from anything she had known, a strange mixture of caution and curiosity. She reminded herself that tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and new opportunities to measure his intentions. But for tonight, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that this man's presence, steady and patient, had already changed the rhythm of her life, if only a little. The morning sun rose slowly, casting a golden light across the plains. Ayanna stepped outside her small home, feeling the familiar warmth on her skin. The crisp air carried the scent of earth, grass, and the distant river, and for a moment, the world felt calm and steady. Today felt different, though. She could feel it in the rhythm of the land and in the quiet presence of the rancher nearby. Over the past days, he had proven patience, respect, and steady reliability. But today would show if that trust could grow beyond mere cooperation. The rancher was already awake, tending to the animals in the pen. His movements were careful and precise, yet there was a confidence to them now that was new. Ayanna watched him quietly from a distance, noting the way he moved among the goats and chickens. He had been helpful, never intrusive, and his actions had shown care and thoughtfulness. Yet she reminded herself that caution was always necessary, especially in a world where kindness could sometimes hide selfish intentions. "Good morning," he said softly when he noticed her. His voice was calm, steady, carrying no expectation or pressure. "Good morning," she replied, her tone neutral, but a small sense of ease had begun to settle over her. She moved toward the garden to check the vegetables, carrying a basket to collect the ripest of the harvest. The rancher followed at a respectful distance, carrying a small watering can.
"I can help with these," he said quietly.
"I can manage," she said, though there was no harshness in her voice. It was a simple test to see if he would respect her autonomy. He nodded, placing the can down and stepping back. His willingness to defer to her judgment was clear, and for a moment, Ayanna felt a small sense of trust growing. The morning passed in quiet labor. They repaired a section of the barn roof that had loosened during the night storms, secured fences, and cleared the small yard of fallen branches. Each task was performed side by side, their cooperation growing seamless. The rancher followed her instructions without hesitation, offering suggestions only when asked, never imposing his own will. Ayanna observed him closely, noting the care he took with each action, the patience in his voice, and the respect in his eyes. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat pressed against their backs. Ayanna prepared a simple meal, setting it on a flat stone under the shade of a tree. They ate quietly, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind providing a gentle soundtrack. There was a rhythm in their silence, an understanding that neither words nor actions were rushed or forced. After lunch, she suggested they inspect the distant fence line near the forest. It was a task she usually did alone, but she wanted to see how the rancher would handle it. Together they walked the path, moving carefully over uneven ground and past tall grass. The forest edge loomed nearby, a reminder that life on the plains was full of potential danger. Ayana's senses were sharp, her instincts alert. She carried a small knife at her side, though it was rarely needed except for reassurance. Halfway to the fence, a sudden movement caught her eye. A deer, startled by the noise of the grass, darted across the path, disappearing into the trees. Ayana's heart quickened, and she glanced at the rancher. He had already slowed, scanning the forest edge for any real threat. His awareness reassured her, and she realized that his presence did not diminish her strength, but added a subtle layer of security. They continued to inspect the fence, mending weak spots and securing posts. The rancher moved with care, listening to her guidance, yet offering thoughtful suggestions where appropriate. Ayana found herself observing him differently now. Over the past days, she had tested his patience, his respect, and his honesty. Each test had been met with steady actions, and she felt the cautious beginnings of trust forming. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they returned to the homestead. Ayana took a moment to look at the land, the garden, the animals, the fence lines, and her small home. Everything was secure, cared for, and orderly. She realized that she had grown accustomed to having the rancher's quiet help, yet it had never felt like intrusion. He had proven that he could respect her autonomy while assisting with her life. Evening settled over the plains, and the sky turned shades of pink and violet. Ayana prepared a modest dinner, while the rancher helped fetch water and set the table. There was a natural rhythm to their actions, a silent cooperation that had developed over days of shared labor. After the meal, they sat near the fire outside, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the plains. The distant river, the wind through the grass, the soft calls of nocturnal animals. Ayana spoke softly, her voice calm but firm. "You have stayed here several days now. You have helped, followed instructions, and respected my boundaries. That is not something many could do." The rancher nodded, his expression serious but gentle. "I understand," he said, "and I do not expect more than your permission to help. I wish only to support, nothing else." She looked into his eyes for a long moment, seeing the honesty reflected there. Her instincts had been tested, her patience tried, and over the days he had proven himself reliable, steady, and respectful. She felt a small relief and gratitude that she had not expected to allow herself. "I have been alone for a long time," she continued, her voice quiet, "and I have built a life that I guard carefully. I have learned to survive, to protect this land, these animals, and myself. That has been my strength and my guide." He listened intently, giving her words the weight they deserved. "I see that," he said softly, "and I respect it. I do not wish to disturb the life you have built. I only wish to be of help where it is welcomed." Ayana allowed herself a small smile, a subtle shift in her demeanor. For the first time in many months, she felt that the boundaries she had set were acknowledged and respected. Trust, though cautious and measured, was beginning to grow, not blindly, but through consistent actions and respect. As night deepened and stars appeared one by one, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She reflected on the past days, the quiet cooperation, the shared labor, the respect, and the patience he had shown. It was different from anything she had experienced in a long time. She realized that strength alone had not been enough to survive, but kindness, patience, and respect, qualities the rancher had demonstrated, were just as essential. The rancher, sensing the shift in her mood, spoke quietly. "You have managed this land with remarkable care. I have seen how you work, how you think, and how you live. I am honored to have been allowed to assist. even in a small way. Ayana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She had not allowed herself to feel comfort from anyone for a long time. But now she could acknowledge that his presence had not been a threat. It had been steady, quiet, and respectful, qualities she valued more than she had realized. "You have earned my trust," she said finally, her voice calm, but with a hint of warmth she had not allowed herself to show before. "But not blindly, not fully, but enough to know that your intentions are true." He nodded, accepting her words without expectation or arrogance. "I am grateful for that," he said softly, "and I will continue to honor it." Night fell fully, and the plains were quiet except for the gentle sounds of nature. Ayana prepared for bed, her mind reflecting on the days past. She realized that her life, which had been solitary and self-reliant, had been enriched not by words, but by the consistent, careful actions of another human being. The rancher's patience, diligence, and respect had proven that trust could be rebuilt, even after years of solitude and caution. As she drifted to sleep, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She knew that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and the continuation of their shared life on the land. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, acknowledging that not all strangers brought harm, and that sometimes steady companionship could coexist with independence. The rancher remained nearby, silently watching over the homestead, a steady presence in the quiet night. Ayana realized that this partnership, built on patience, respect, and care, was not a threat to her life, but a strengthening of it. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a subtle hope, a quiet promise that life could be shared without losing oneself. The fire flickered, the stars shone brightly, and the plains remained calm. Ayana closed her eyes, confident that the days ahead would be faced with strength, patience, and newfound trust.